Hello everybody, it's your boy Hawka, the Counter-Strike scholar, live and in the flesh, here to talk to you today about my favorite CSGO player from every top 10 team. So my last video was a little bit more negative than I normally like to be, talking about some of the struggles FaZe have been having. So I thought, why not go with a more positive video, get back on those hashtag positive vibes, and go ahead and pick my favorite player on every top 10 team. This is just my personal favorite player. I'm not picking the best player. I'm not picking the standout player every time. I'm picking based on my own personal preference and just who I like to watch playing Counter-Strike. Before we get into the video though, now that I can look you down the barrel of this camera, I can remind you that I'm trying to hit 100k subs by the end of the year. So if you enjoy the content, help me out, hit that subscribe button, and let's not waste any more of your precious time. Let's get into it. So the first team, when I looked at the top 10 a couple of weeks ago, was Complexity. And on this lineup, I went ahead and picked Rush. I think there's a couple of players you could pick from on this team, but my personal favorite has to be Rush. I think a really interesting stat about him is his overall rating doesn't look too good. But if you go ahead and actually dive into that rating, you can see it's on T side where he's having a much tougher time with just a 0.88 T side rating. While on CT side, he's actually doing really well with a 1.02 rating. And I think considering the spots he plays, tough spots like B-site Mirage, where you oftentimes don't get that many kills or that much action, I think that shows he's a really competent player in a lot of tough spots on CT side. And on T side, I think he has a bunch of bad entry spots which set up config to trade him, which is why his rating is a little bit lower. This is also reflected in his opening kill success rate, which is better on CT side, although he is taking way fewer of those fights on CT side. And I just think in general, Rush is a player who has outlasted a lot of other players by making the most of his skill set. He's willing to do a lot for the team, and for that, I love watching him play, and I love watching what he can do and how he really maximizes what he has. In at number 9 was Liquid, and for them, I went with Elige. There were a couple of options here. It kind of came down to between Elige and Naf in my head. But I have this kind of idea that as we continue to go through Counter-Strike, it might follow down the path of some traditional sports where being a more versatile and well-rounded player is important. So I look at the NBA, for example. You used to be able to get away with not shooting the three-point shot, but nowadays, pretty much everyone has to be good at it to go ahead and space the floor. And I think that kind of fits in with why I've gone with Elige over Naf, because I think he is a more versatile player, and I think Counter-Strike could go down that road in the future where it's hard to have that same sort of defined role. Another thing I love about Elige is he's one of those rare star players who is really willing to go for entries, even though I don't necessarily think he would have to on this team. So he has a 13.4% entry round percentage, and there were only a few other riflers that were higher than that, and that's guys like Yakinda, guys like Mir, Navi, and then Nico, who's been doing a bit of AWPing and a bit of rifling. And I think this negatively impacts his clutch round percentage in a bad way. So, for example, Nico has similar amount of opening duels he takes, but Nico was 6th highest on clutch round percentage, while Elige was in the lower half. And I think if Elige wanted to, he could call to be that standout player on this team, but instead he realizes they've got other players on this squad that can do that, like Naf, so he's really adaptable to the squad, which is something I love. He also has the highest saved teammates per round on his team. I'm not sure how much I care about that stat, but it's kind of a cool one to throw in there. And then finally, the thing I really love is just how often Liquid win rounds when he gets that first kill. And I think it just goes to show when he is going in aggressively, it oftentimes leads to a round win. And that's why I'm so glad Elige has adapted himself to this more aggressive play style. even though I think he could be fantastic in clutch scenarios as a very cerebral player, he's doing a really great job and having a lot of impact for his team. Up next, we have Big, and for Big, I think there's only one player I would personally choose, and that is Tabson. I think he's just a cool dude, firstly. I love Tabson in general. I love how he shifted his playing style away from that star player into an IGL. I also think his utility is excellent. You can see on a very good Big roster at using nades, he is still the best at getting flash assists. He's still got the highest opponents flashed on his team and the third highest enemy blinded time in the entire game, which is very impressive. Only Fallen and Glaive are ahead of him on opponents' time blinded. And I just think in general, whenever a star player can transition into an IGL and have some of those mid-round calls like Tabson does sometimes on Mirage, I think it's great to see. And I'm always a fan of those players that can completely adapt their play style. Next team on the list is Furia, and I'm not going to give you any points for predicting I was going to pick Art out of Furia. I mean, let's be real. Art basically made my YouTube channel. I got 1 million views off the back of his name. So I guess I'm repaying him a little bit here. I'm giving him my favorite player on Furia. How's that, Art? Is that a fair trade deal? Seriously, though, firstly, I feel like Art's a little bit sad on that picture. Let's go ahead and see if we can find a better one. There we go. That's the smile I want to see. I love seeing Art happy, and I'm going to go ahead and say the line that everyone at home is waiting for me to say. Here we go. Art has the highest entry round percentage in the world at 18.3% of entry rounds. And just in general, he breaks these entry stats. On CT side, he still takes the opening duel way more than most other people and wins them 59% of the time, which is crazy. I'm so impressed by how often his CT pushes work out for him. Recently, though, his T-side success rate has been dropping down to 39%, which is something to keep an eye on going forwards. And you can even see that reflected in the CT compared to T-side stats. On CT side, he's still putting up a really solid 1.13 rating, while on T side, he's only there at a 0.92. And that plays into how Furia play their T sides overall. And I am slightly concerned he's started to get figured out by some teams who put the prep work in. But I'm hoping he can adapt. We know that Art always has new aggressive plays to come up with. And again, his team are winning 74% of the rounds when he gets the first kill, which is actually way higher than I was expecting, and a really good number considering how often he gets that entry. Up next is a team who have had a bit of a tumultuous time recently. Virtus.pro have had some shaky results, but for me, the favorite player to watch on this team has to be Yakinda. I'm not really a massive fan of James' playstyle personally, even if it is effective, and the other players don't really have that same wow factor that Yakinda does. You can see he is just behind Art on those entry round percentage stats, coming in at second place. The key difference here, though, is that Art wasn't getting too many multi-kills. He was in the lower half of players getting multi-kills, but Yakinda is actually really high up there. Despite playing pretty aggressively, his 20% multi-kill round stat puts him 6th in the world. And I am very impressed by his aggression and his ability to still get multi-kills, because oftentimes you'd expect him to maybe go 1-for-1. He also has the highest nade damage on Virtus.pro, which is not what I was expecting, considering, again, we think of him as this aggressive player who might not always get to use those nades. But I do think that nade damage stat is quite spot dependent, and I know Yakinda plays Banana on Inferno, for example, where you can rack up that utility damage. And finally, unlike Art, whose T-side success has dropped off slightly, Yakinda's has stayed pretty solid, pretty consistent, and pretty close to his CT effectiveness. Into the top 5 teams, we have G2, and you might be a bit surprised by this one. I'm not going with one of the big hitters. I'm going with Jax. I think in general, I'm probably a fan of these sorts of players who go under the radar a little bit, who are willing to do a lot for the team. And something I like about Jax is he has the 11th highest opening kills attempted in the world. But furthermore, his team win 78.8% of the rounds after he gets that first kill. So he sent in first a lot, and when he's getting those entries, they are very often converting those into round wins. That 78% number is above players like Simple, who only win 76% of rounds. Device, who only wins 74% of rounds when he gets the entry, which goes to show the impact this guy can have when he frags, and that's why I basically call him Mr. Impact Fragger. I feel like he is probably one of the players in the world who gets the most of his kills as impact frags, and I just think it's a very cool story having a 28-year-old guy almost come in as a rookie and show that he is able to hang at the top level of the game. That is kind of a rare storyline, not one you get too often. I'm glad that Jax has proven a lot of people wrong and found his way back into this G2 lineup. For Astralis, I have a bit of a tough time. I like the entire team, but I feel like they work better as a squad than as individuals, if that makes sense. For the player, though, I have picked Glaive. Just historically, the stuff he's done and the way that Astralis have played at their peak under Glaive is some of the most beautiful Counter-Strike I have ever seen, with the way it all worked together so seamlessly, the way the timings were so perfect, the way that Glaive always seemed to have the right call when they needed that hero round to pull them through. He obviously is a legendary IGL in terms of CSGO, and I don't have too many stats for Glaive, but he is one of the better players in terms of utility in the world. You can see there with the 7.8 nade damage per round. That is a really high number. He has the second highest enemy blinded time in the world, just behind Fallen at number 1. So he's one of those players who's putting that time into learning all the proper nades. I wrote down that his middle name is Eggholm just because I find that funny. There's no other reason for that. And Glaive actually has the same birthday as my dog, June 7th. I don't know why you would ever need that information, but now you have it in your brain. Getting into the top 3 teams, I have my heroic player of choice, which is Shush with some snazzy shades on. Shush is a player who I've liked for a long time. You can see there the first stat I brought up is his 7th highest support round percentage. That is a stat which counts rounds where you get an assist, you survive, or you are traded. And because of the survival element of that stat, a lot of the players that are high up on it are lurkers, kind of like JKS and Zipex are high on that stat because you don't have to go in as often as your teammates, and sometimes your teammates might just take the site and win the round for you, and then you can just survive and you get something on the support round stat. Unlike the other players, though, I think Shush entries quite a bit more than some of the other players I see on that support round stat. He's not entering a massive amount. I think it's 18% of rounds on T's side, but it's still way more than most of the other players who do well on that support round stat. And I also think him being so reliable and so solid opens up a huge amount of Heroic's game and a huge amount of their options. If you watch Heroic's CT side specifically, you know they like to take a lot of risks on this team, and that makes it incredibly important for their solo site players to be really reliable and either just survive or at least not give away too much. And for me, Shush has been a huge upgrade in opening up Heroic to be more confident in making some of those plays because of his consistency and because of his reliability. And then the last stat at the bottom there, I don't know if that is useful in any sense, but it is a stat that works. For some reason, Shush is the 3rd lowest time spent blinded out of the pro players I looked at. Not sure what to take away from that, but I guess those shades are helping him dodge those flashes, apparently. into the top 2 teams. It is 2 CIS teams right now. And the first one being Navi. Look, if you thought I wasn't going to pick Simple on Navi, I think you've got a screw loose. Like, I do like some other players on this team. I think Perfecto is a really solid pickup. I like what he's done. I kind of like Boomich in some senses. I kind of hate him in other senses. He's a very coin flippy player to me. On some days I love him. On some days I don't. But come on now. If you've watched Counter-Strike, Simple is probably not just your favorite player on Navi. He's got to be in contention for your favorite player in the world. I mean, just the way he came out recently and said he doesn't want to switch to Valorant. He came out and said he is still super motivated and hungry to prove he can do it at the majors, to prove he can consistently win trophies. That is what I want to hear from someone who is pretty much regarded as the best player right now, but doesn't have the accolades to maybe back it up into the future. When you look back at Simple's career, you want him to have those big tournaments under his belt. And these stats are some of the reasons why. CT side, this dude is ridiculous. 1.37 CT rating. His nuke stats are also unreal. He is the king of nuke right now. And I also love that he has the 7th highest entry round percentage in the world while being such a superstar and such a standout player. I think he's realized he has to go for a lot of those early kills and early fights. And yet, despite that, he also has the most flash assists on Navi, which isn't a stat I was expecting him to be that high up in. But his nades are actually really solid. Maybe part of that is because he can get an early kill with the AWP and then play a bit more towards the back of the pack later in the round. But it's still impressive to me that his flashes are doing so well. And look, do I really need to say anything else? Simple is synonymous with Counter-Strike at this point, and for a good reason. I love to watch him play. I think he may be the most fun player to watch individually when he has his peaks. He can do things no one else can. And the number 1 team in the world, it's Gambit and Hiro I have to pick from this squad. This was a really tricky one because I love everyone on this team. I love players who have a really defined play style, and I think that's what edged me towards Hiro because he is such a passive player and because it is quite unique for such a passive AWPer to be so effective. But you have guys like Inters who plays a really weirdly unique play style where he's oftentimes completely away from the rest of the squad, but Gambit make it work. They allow him to pressure elsewhere. I think he has a low-key underrated job on this team. Hobbit's storyline is just awesome. Having him back onto Gambit now and seeing them do so well, that is like a storyline you would write in a movie. Axile, kind of similar. He came into Gambit initially, then he had to go back down to the youngsters. Now he's proving what he can do. Just this entire team, and Navi obviously is an IGL, not someone we expected to do too well, and he's really exceeded expectations coming out of nowhere. But Hiro is just unreal with some of these numbers. His clutch round percentage is number 1 by quite a good distance at 2.4%, and I just think it's so impressive that he's able to clutch so many rounds on the AWP, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. He does okay on entry round percentage, but more importantly, he has the lowest deaths per round in the world by some distance, even lower than Jame, probably because Gambit are winning more rounds, but still super impressive. And because he doesn't entry as often with the AWP, because he's not looking for picks as often as some other snipers, he can be super efficient with the opening duels he takes, and that puts him 3rd best in his opening kill success rate. And I just love his impact while being passive. I think it's very, very cool to see. His team also win a bunch of the rounds when he gets that first kill because he can be so effective with the way he chooses his early fights. Yeah, I think Simple is such a cool player, such a unique playstyle, and a playstyle I didn't expect was going to work initially, but I'm really glad to see how effective and how successful he has been. So, let me know, guys. Do you agree, disagree with my picks? I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really care if you agree or disagree because it's my personal favorite players, but I want you guys to tell me if you have any players you would have added to this list. Maybe out of any of these teams, maybe out of some of the other teams. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you enjoyed this slightly different video, and I plan to get back to the more analytical content soon. So make sure to stick around, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll catch you next time. I don't know what to do with my hands. I'm not normally on camera, but yeah, I'll catch you next time.